It's Monday, February 13th, 2023, 2 p.m. This special meeting of the Board of Commissioners is called to order. City Clerk, will you call the roll?
Mayor Hendricks,
Here.
Vice Mayor Andrews,
Here.
Commissioner Taglerini,
Here.
Commissioner Kerr,
Here.
Commissioner Hudson,
Here.
all are present.
First is public comment. If there's anyone that has a public comment, please step to the podium, state your name and address. You have 3 minutes to speak. That will be for anything that is not on today's agenda. Moving forward, contracts and agreements. Duke Energy's binding cost estimate for the final phase 3 of Gulf Boulevard undergrounding utilities. Director Webfer.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. As discussed at the meeting, we did have a meeting with Duke Energy on the 9th. We are still waiting for more details to come back from Duke, but what was discussed was the reasons for the increase, which was due to the transformers, the switchbacks, and basically they just told us that everything's gone up about 120%, which also included concrete. But with that being said, they are going to check these numbers. And as I stated previously, we have 180 days from the date that that BCE was issued, which was on, I believe, January 18th. So what we agreed to do was one of our options is to go ahead and pay the original $2.2 million, which will release the conduit, but then it will allow Duke Energy to refresh those numbers. Since the BCE is already completed, it won't take them months to refresh. What can be good with that is prices can be given a chance to come down. Worst case scenario, it stays the same. It won't hurt us, but the most expensive portion of this is the transformers, but not the conduit. I have Mark here. He can kind of touch on some more of the logistics if you guys have some questions.
Sure. Yes. Hi, Mark.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the allowing me in the building again. So it was interesting to hear the increases on the equipment. So kind of wrap that up. So what we thought was we asked, since we've got a BCE, it's good for 180 days. We knew that the biggest risk is the construction cost, right? Labor for that we feel like has the potential to increase, whereas we feel like the equipment might have a little bit of a downward pressure on those numbers. So we asked them can you go back to the computer every 30 days, just keep regenerating, because they're dealing with the vendors that are within the Duke organization. So we thought that those prices could go down. So we don't want to pay today's prices for something that in potentially between now and the 180 days, it could have some downward movement. So they can generate, like Megan said, that report could be generated within 5 minutes. Every 30 days, we'll get an update on that. So what we thought might be the best interest is to secure the conduit. The conduit really didn't have that much of an inflationary cost. There wasn't anything out of that. The concrete they did, I feel like, I have no way of knowing for sure, but I feel like concrete's coming down from what we're seeing in the industry. We think that it might have more of a possibility of going downward. So we thought that if we pull that out in the equipment would be the last thing that gets installed anyway, including the wire. That's where you're seeing your biggest inflationary costs that have come in for the last year. Shocked to see they said that, some of it's been over 100% increase on some of those switch gears. It's pretty surprising. So I would imagine that you might see some of those prices go down. That would be our recommendation. We went back and we sharpened our pencils quite a bit, looking at every little foot, every little detail in the drawings to really kind of get this thing done. What we can do on the construction side is we found that we've got upwards of about $200,000 that we can take off of those costs. Like I said, the only thing on that is there's not really much more room than that, but we thought that's kind of a good number to look at. And then that kind of brings everything down to where it's still about 360 under or over what we originally had budgeted versus the 600 and something that we had last week. If we see the switches and the transformers and the concrete costs come down, that number from 360 could be 260, 160, 100. We don't know how much that might go down, but it's worth, looking at that every 30 days. So I guess our recommendation would be is take the original amount that we had to add to the Mayor Bill Queen with North Readington was also at the meeting. What he's asked is they're kind of in the same thing. There really wasn't anything that they can do other than regenerate that sheet. They want to get the conduit. That's kind of their direction. They just asked Duke for the amount that's over what the original BCE was. We just need time to pay that off. Maybe it's 5, 10 years, work out some kind of plan. So that's what they're doing with him, is trying to take that additional portion. So your worst case scenario, like I said, is somewhere in the 300 and something $1,000 range, 360. Is that if the equipment never goes down in the next 180 days, that would be your worst case, that amount be stretched out over an additional period of time to give everybody a chance to pay that. I feel like that number is actually going to come down with those generating of new BCEs every 30 days. I think equipment costs will come down.
And then also with that, we had talked about Gulf Lane being an addition. So I just want to clarify, there is only 2 blocks of Gulf Lane that the city was going to pay for in addition to the Gulf Boulevard project. And the reason for that being was from 135th to about 132nd, when Duke Energy did the design, they moved that 4-inch conduit to Gulf Lane because on Gulf Boulevard, it didn't service any residents. So they moved it on to Gulf Lane. So we are not paying any additional prices for that. I did ask Duke for an estimated cost for the 132nd to 130th parking lot, and they said approximately $108,000. I do have budgeted funds for the Gulf Lane project for that piece. So we could actually take that and subtract it from that 300,000 that we are over budget. So it really would be 200 and something thousand.
Okay, and I see Chiquita's here. Chiquita, why don't you come on up front, because I'm sure we'll have some questions for you. And initially, part of my question is,
Hi, good afternoon.
how are you? Would you introduce yourself? I'm sure there are some commissioners that may not know who you are.
Hi, good evening, Commissioners and Mayor. My name is Chiquita Clark, and I serve on the Government and Community Relations team alongside Jeff Baker, who you may all know.
Thank you. One of my questions is that we are paying for Duke Energy's equipment. And that's part of the problem I have when we have antiquated transformers and whatnot that are out there. Why isn't Duke Energy putting some of this cost out there to replace Duke Energy's transformers?
So very good question. And with the general economy and inflation and everything that has increased, that was something that we reviewed. I wasn't at the meeting. We had another engagement, but from what I understand, that is something that we are looking into. And that's why we're considering the payment plan. Our standards team, they have to select facilities and transformers in our switch gears is what's in question at the moment. That has increased. Based on our standards from the Public Service Commission, the Florida Public Service Commission. And so once those devices or facilities are selected, that's what we roll into our policy for any projects that we're doing. And so unfortunately, at the moment, we can't change anything, but we are looking to see ways in which we can accommodate you guys in terms of a payment plan.
Well, even beyond a payment plan, though, the city's footing the bill for Duke Energy's switchgear.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the
I
question?
say, even beyond the payment plan, though, the city is footing the bill for your switchgear.
That's our policy at the moment. Yes, that's correct. Any projects that we have underway are rolled into our binding cost estimate. We have to ensure that it abides by our standards. And technically, whatever you have budget in terms of payment, that's what I guess our policy would be right now.
Well, yeah, that's your policy, but as a government, I don't see us having to pay for your equipment. I mean, Duke Energy doesn't buy my car. It's probably a poor analogy, but you know what, you understand what I'm saying.
I do. I understand. Yeah.
And I'm sure y'all are trying to be good partners in this, but we're also supposed to trying to be good stewards of the city's finances. And And it just, I don't think it's right for us to continue to pay for Duke Energy's equipment. So what happens when that equipment fails? Is the city responsible then because we bought it? Or is it just your equipment?
Understood, understood. Definitely understand your concerns, and I'll take it back to our team so they can discuss further.
So Mayor, if you can see up on the board, that's the BCE, the breakdown. And if you see on the bottom, it says total credits applied to the project. That is a credit that was provided to this BCE from Duke Energy for the, is it the hardening cost?
So it's a combination. So the credit applied to a couple of things. So there's Blue Book value, right? So what they're trying to do is basically say there's some assets out there now that are going to be removed, but there's some value associated with that. So there's like a net Blue Book value. It's a convoluted set of series of things that are weighed into that credit, but it's regulated by the Public Service Commission. So they went there. So basically, in short, what that means is there's a Blue Book value, there's storm restoration costs that futuristically would be reduced. So that number of the 2-point-something million that's being credited back is for that. So there's lack of a better word, I wouldn't say betterment, but because the facility is actually being upgraded from its current aerial facilities, that's what that credit. So they are paying the cities back. That's why they're required to give you a credit. So to your point, Mayor, is it's not fair for municipality to absorb the entire cost of that infrastructure because there's some existing betterment, there's some value to that. So that's why they're required by the Public Service Commission to apply that credit. So that's been applied to that work.
Yeah, I mean, Duke Energy will be making a profit off our investment. And I think that needs to be shared with the city. Are these net costs on the switchgear and transformers?
The cost is everything. So it's the conduit, the wire, the switching. The only reason that we kind of brought up those switch gears, I think for your project, don't quote me, I need to look at it real quick. Actually, I might have it here in front of me. Let me just check. I want to find out how many switches you have. So right now you have 10 switches. So what we saw, don't quote, maybe you can help me out here with that. I don't recall the number, but I believe that those have gone upwards of about $80,000 a piece, right? Versus, 60, 50,000 that they were about a year ago. So that's what we were thinking. Our recommendation would be the conduit hasn't really gone up. We've seen we asked them to kind of go through what are the inflationary costs because we don't see that industry wide as it relates to the total BCE. So what we determined was the conduit isn't really that significant. We saw that the wire had a little bit of increase. The equipment was your largest. So you've got 10 switches and then you've got 5 Delta banks, 15 transformers and 5 3-phase transformers. So that's a pretty significant amount of equipment. So that's why we asked, is there a way to regenerate that BCE? So hopefully those costs would go down because if you're looking at about 80, say $90,000 per switch, you've got almost 400 something, $500,000 just in those switches alone. If they went down by 10%, that's 50 grand. If we get lucky and they go 20, it's 100 grand. Then you've got your transformers. And that's what we're thinking. If we're at a deficit now of about 350 and we see 10%, 15% decrease on that, that could almost maybe cover that. Or if it doesn't, maybe it covers a portion of it. It wouldn't be the significant that you see in today. And then that's why we went back on the construction side too. What we did is we went through the design and said, we can shorten this, we can, so we basically just scoured through this thing to look at every nook and cranny to see if anything could be scaled back, if there's anything spared. That's how we came back with on our contractor's port. I'm not the contractor, but on that portion of it, we found the $200,000 shaved off. Now we're hoping that maybe the equipment comes down. And at the end of the day, maybe we're right back where we thought we would be with the original estimates. That's the hope and goal. Worst case, like Miriam and Jeff had explained, is the BCE can't go up because they're locked in. So even if those costs for those switches go up to $120,000 between now and 6 months, doesn't matter. They have to honor what they gave you that letter for.
So we're in no danger of waiting 180 days and find out that it goes over that BC.
Right,
Okay.
right.
That was my question.
Yes, sir. So our concern with that and the reason we when we had our discussion, we thought if we could at least get the conduit and get the equipment and materials that we know aren't that, get the construction of that, because that's your biggest expense. That's where your risk comes in, is your labor cost. Does labor for that stuff in 6 months, 7 months come up? Maybe it comes down. We don't know. So the thought is get that stuff. There's not much of an inflationary pressure on that. That way you're not delaying getting the infrastructure down. The equipment's one of the last things to get set. So once all the conduits in, they come and they pull the wire, they set the equipment, do the make ready, and then energize those conversions. Our thought is we've got time, and definitely 6 months it would take you to install the conduit. What if those equipment prices start falling down? Then we might not be, $350,000, $360,000 shortfall at the end of the day. There's just no way of knowing. Worst case, that is what we're looking at. That's what we said. If that worst case scenario happened, let's have some type of a plan where that could be paid off of a period of time. Or I don't know if we've got excess on the golf lane budget that would absorb that. We don't know that, but our hope is that equipment falls. We feel like maybe, I don't know with the materials, but we're seeing some of that stuff might fall in the next 6 months.
So back to my original question, is that net costs on these items, or is there a nice profit built in there for someone? And if so, can't the city go directly and purchase these for the use?
That I can't speak to if there's a profit margin. I don't think by regulation y'all can charge a profit on the equipment, can you? Or I don't know the policy.
All of the costs for our facilities is built into what's mandated by the Florida Public Service Commission. And so there is, from what I understand, not a profit margin outside of what the ratepayers have been cleared to pay. And so we cannot build in a revenue base based on Duke Energy's mandate. It has to go through the Public Service Commission.
Okay, so you're saying it's whatever profit you've got is built in by the Public Service Commission.
We're mandated by the Public Service Commission. And
Yeah.
so we can't go beyond what they have cleared us or given us approval for.
Yeah.
I do know from my experience in dealing with FPL, that's a pretty regulated. The Public Service Commission is really a good entity to kind of protect the consumers, municipalities. There's a very stringent regulation as to how much of a municipality can charge, or not a municipality, but agency like a TICO, FPL, Dukes, of what they can charge because of that reason, that there's not a policy where you can just charge what you want to charge, because there is wouldn't say monopoly, but they are the power companies. So that's why that regulation's in place, so that you can't, you're not going to be paying increase or profits on stuff like that.
Is there a cost in permitting or agreements if we delay?
The only thing that would factor, so you're saying like if you just wanted to wait the 6 months to see what might play out?
Or if we only do 80% of it or 90% of it or whatever, and have to go back and do parts of it again, or roll it into the next stage?
They did offer a scale back version of 3 blocks that would fit within the budget. We I think collectively thought that the risk and the cost on that I think that risk might be a little bit more for the city, but it's definitely, we can come back to that and look at, but I think it was scaling it back 3 blocks. We just hate it because what you're doing in that case scenario is I got to add dead end poles, right? So you're basically kind of like what you had in your previous, it just adds some cost. So what you might save, you might spend. So we were just kind of cautious. We were hoping that we could come up with some type of other way to get that back on budget, rather than to short those 3 blocks and have you pay a little incremental. It's not significant, but those dead end poles and risers and stuff that, it could be $100,000 worth of work or so. I just don't want the city to have to pay that for those short blocks. But we think that this is kind of a good approach. If with the contractor, the bid's only good for a certain amount of time, because they're worried that what they're charging now, that the labor might go up. So that's the only reason we say, well, maybe the thought would be over the next 6 months, that's about what we project the construction might take. Then that can move on. The permitting with DOT is as you guys probably know, that's a process, and could be anywhere between 60 to 70 days. So we got time. They could keep regenerating the BCE. And like I said, our hope is that hopefully that materials might go down. And they were Miriam was willing to kind of
Yes.
rerun that report every 30 days so we can kind of monitor that and see. I think if you see a month that looks real good, that's going to be the hard part is, do you jump on that and lock it in, or do you wait another 30 days to see if it goes down or does it come up? So that's going to be our fear is where's the bottom at on that? But I think we could come back at least every 30 days and share with you what that number looks like and see where you guys. And good point. We meet bi-weekly with Duke, so we're having constant meetings. So we'll run those numbers like on our interest too. We want to kind of see how that will look like in 30 days ourselves, but it's just a matter of her repopulating it. I think she said it takes like 5 or 10 minutes, so we don't have to wait. That was our biggest fear is we had to wait for a new BCE. That could be a while, or if you go back and you change the design, if you did shorten the run a few blocks, they got to go in and redesign things. So now the BCE goes away. You got to wait till that design's 100% complete before they can generate it. Now that it's done, it's complete, they can just keep populating. It could probably be done every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, every month, whatever you prefer.
So maintenance will be, long-term maintenance will be on Duke Energy on this.
Yes,
Yes.
that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, they fully own the asset at all times, other than, with the conduits being installed till it's turned over. But once that asset's theirs, city doesn't have any obligation, future replacement of the wire, conduit, equipment, that would all fall back on Duke. That's not the city.
Well, that brings me back to why isn't Duke Energy paying for their equipment? But I've already beaten that horse to death, I guess.
So what you're saying is in 30 days, if you find the equipment cost has gone down, is it like locking in a mortgage rate? Once you lock it, you lock it? Or what if you lock it and in 60 days, it's gone down even further? Can you go back and lock it in at a lower rate?
That's kind of an interesting.
That's a very interesting question. I can go back to Miriam to confirm. But as far as I know, in line with the 180-day binding cost estimate, that's about the same amount of time. You can like in the amount or the estimate for the facilities as well.
So you'd have to follow up to get an answer.
Yes, that's correct.
So I think that's our recommendation is to strip out the equipment because we know that's what's vulnerable. I don't think any of the other items that really have any of major significance. Could the conduit come down? You're talking, pennies or, dimes on the dollar. It's not that significant. The equipment is where we saw the astronomical increases. So those 20 something pieces of transformers and then your 5 or 10 switches, that's where you're going to see your downfall. So it would almost be like the BCE would be, you go ahead and take all the material and all the costs. So that BCE includes all the rec out of the existing infrastructure. Once all the new infrastructure is in place,
He means removal.
removal, sorry, demo, or so, all the poles coming out. That, we think that's what I'm saying, that might be higher, right? Because your labor could maybe go up in the next 6 months. So take all this stuff out that we know and just ask that the BC, all they're going to be repopulating is just the switches and those pieces of equipment. So I think to your point, it'd be good to say for 180 days, just continue to run that. And maybe on day 180, we take the lowest of those 6 months. I don't know if that's something.
That's really the question. I'm very encouraged on what you were able to do at your meeting. I'm encouraged about the 108,000 because we were looking at what do we do with Golf Lane. It's getting close. It's really getting close.
It is.
And if we can so what you're asking us to do today is to approve moving forward with what you're recommending on the equipment. So if we can do what you're saying there, we can keep checking it and kind of lock it in at the lowest over that 180-day period. That'd be awesome, in my opinion.
So I guess the request is to go ahead forward with the BC with all materials with the exception of the equipment. All the equipment would be isolated and every 30 days that would be ran. And then in the 6-month period, if we get the lowest of whatever that might be within that 6-month period.
Sounds good.
Okay,
Okay, Robin. The last couple of years, the revenue has been higher than we projected. We don't have very much of this year passed, but is it kind of looking the same way? We're not going to get into financial trouble or whatever by signing up for.
All indications point to similar to, for the current year, similar to the prior year, and we still have very, very good balances in just about all of our funds, even sanitation. If you may recall, during the budget was finally in the positive, and there's no indication that those will decrease. Certainly, certain projects we're starting to pay for some projects, but of course, they're all budgeted, and we obviously try to keep them on time and within budget. But yeah, all indications are that financially we are in a positive direction. They're very positive, I would say.
I think we go for it.
Yeah, and the majority of this is already budgeted, right? And we're not talking about there's a certain stipend that we're not exactly sure what that number is, but the majority of this project has been budgeted already, and it's just a little overhang that we're looking at as far as funding, right? Okay.
Correct.
I know you said this, but I just want to confirm it. There's no risk that waiting it's going to go over what the current BCE after 100 days. We would not ever have to go higher
We
than
will
what,
not, we
than
will
it's said.
not go higher. No. We will
Yeah,
make
and
sure we
short
lock
of
in the
short of
number.
getting Duke to pay for all of it, I guess I would prefer to go with that route.
Yeah, that's the beauty in that 180 days, even if that equipment gets higher, if it goes up to 150, it doesn't matter to you guys because that's a binding cost estimate they provided you. It's good for 180 days. So that's what we thought. Well, that's good. So when it gets refreshed, the refreshing just basically would be the negative. It would never exceed what it currently is. So that's why when we ran the numbers right now, we're about 360 under or over, I should say. But we know that we're hopeful that there's downward, inflationary on the equipment. It could wind up zeroing that out, or maybe it's just 100. Like I said, we're at 600,000 last week, so we were able to kind of shave off, a couple 100,000 to get this thing down. We're just trying to get it to the finish line.
You suggest that it could possibly even be done at your biweekly meetings. Is that something that's negotiable? I mean, you said a month or every 2 weeks, just to make sure we get current updates on this.
For Miriam, it's a touch of a button.
Yeah.
So we can request
I would like
bi-weekly
that
for
to
her to
happen.
update the cost. Yeah, absolutely.
We can send, if you want, every month, we can send the city managers basically an update. Here's what we got. And we like the transparency. So for our end, if you just say, here's what it is, so you guys can continually watch that at month after month progress. But just remember at the 180 day, that's, it's got to be finalized at that. So.
okay. All right. I have no more questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gomez, do you have any more input on this for us?
I think as Chiquita, Ms. Clark mentioned, that the rates, of course, utilities are profit making. I mean, they're enterprise funds. But they are, as has been stated, very highly regulated under tariffs that actually set their rates, and you have written and oral presentations and essentially discussions, arguments in front of the Public Service Commission whenever any rates are set to change. So just wanted to add that. Actually, a copy of the tariff is in your packet if you want to find out more about it, but the rates are set in there. There is a provision where an applicant, and we're the applicant, we are the ones requesting the undergrounding. Of course, there's also a benefit to any utility, Duke Energy in this case, for undergrounding, because it does benefit them as well as us. It benefits everyone. But the tariffs do allow for applicants to perform some of the work, but I can tell you that it's best left to the actual experts in the process, and this would go for any utility, whether you're, installing, water, sewer, gas, even communication services. It's just best left to them. No matter who you hire, obviously they will have some sort of profit motive in the bid that you solicit and receive. So we feel, the staff and I, very comfortable, obviously, in Duke Energy performing, or the contractors performing the work, but through this whole process that is very common for cities. One response just of mayor and commission that has not happened in some time, but in a prior life, another city that I worked in, how this was resolved, where the assessments were issued to customers. Now, that has never been the process here, nor is it going to be that way. But that is kind of historically, or in the past throughout the country, how some of these have been managed. But of course, it depends on your budget, financial condition, and certainly I think for many cities, typically not something that is paid but directly by residents, but rather the government through its own management determines, how to best manage the project. Well, we will certainly, I don't mean to interrupt, but we will certainly keep you updated every month as to the progress.
Yeah, and clearly not just Madeira Beach, but the other municipalities are having these same issues, and it's something we need to go back to the county on for more funding from Pennies for Pinellas. So, okay.
We would need, Megan, we need for them to approve proceeding as has been indicated.
So is there any public comment on this? If not, I need a motion, please.
All right, I'll make a motion to approve the Duke Energy binding cost estimate for the final phase 3 of Gulf Boulevard undergrounding utilities with the 180-day checkup on prices for equipment.
Is there a second?
Second.
City Clerk, will you call the roll?
Commissioner Hudson,
Yes.
Commissioner Taglerini.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Andrews.
Yes.
Commissioner Kerr,
Yes.
Mayor Hendricks.
Yes.
The motion carried 5-0.
Having no more business, this meeting is adjourned at 2:31 PM.
Thank you.